My name is Mark, and until recently, I thought I had a good marriage. Jennifer, my wife of 8 years, and I seemed like a picture-perfect couple to everyone around us. We had no kids, which Jen often hinted was my fault for being too busy with work, but I didn't think much of it. We lived a comfortable life in a cozy suburban home, had steady jobs, and enough savings to go on a few nice vacations each year. I thought everything was fine. Maybe not exciting, but stable, you know? But then, about 6 months ago, I started noticing changes. Jen's demeanor shifted from being caring and loving to, well, a complete bitch, honestly. She started snapping at me over the smallest things, like me forgetting to pick up milk on my way home or leaving a sock or two around. It wasn't just the irritation. It was the look in her eyes, like she couldn't stand the sight of me. And suddenly, she had all these work events that would pop up, taking her out late into the night. You'd think that after all these years, I'd know when my wife was lying. But every time I questioned her about her whereabouts, she'd twist the narrative, making me feel like some paranoid idiot. "Mark, don't you have any friends to hang out with instead of keeping tabs on me?" she'd sneer. And then she'd smile, that fake, sweet smile, like she was dealing with a troublesome child. It's crazy how someone's entire demeanor can change in a blink, but I saw it firsthand. She'd flip back to her phone, her fingers tapping away furiously, ignoring me like I was a ghost. I wanted to believe her. After all, 8 years is a long time, and I didn't want to throw it all away because of a rough patch. That's what I convinced myself it was. Maybe I wasn't being supportive enough, or maybe I'd been too focused on work and neglected her needs. But then it got worse. The work events became longer, and the explanations more far-fetched. One evening, when she came home reeking of cheap perfume that definitely wasn't hers, I decided to put my foot down. "Where have you been, Jen?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though my insides were churning. She looked at me like I was some kind of insect she wanted to crush. "Out," she replied curtly, not even bothering to elaborate. "Out where? With who?" I pressed. I knew it was a dangerous game to play, but I was desperate. Jen sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Mark, for God's sake, do you really have nothing better to do than to interrogate me?" "I was with Kelly and Sarah. We had some drinks, and I lost track of time." "Is that a crime?" It wasn't the answer, but the way she said it. Her tone was dripping with contempt, as if she was daring me to call her out on a lie. And I almost did. Almost. But then she brushed past me, slamming the bathroom door shut behind her. I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling like a complete fool. I tried to shake off my suspicions, thinking maybe I was overreacting. But those lingering doubts kept growing like weeds in my mind. And then there was the phone, always turned off when she was home or glued to her hand when she was out. I'd never been one to invade her privacy, but one night I couldn't resist. She was in the shower, and I saw it sitting there, unguarded on the nightstand. I reached for it, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. But right as I was about to unlock it, the screen lit up with a notification. "Can't wait to see you again, babe." The sender's name? Just a number. No name, no picture, nothing. I froze, my fingers trembling over the phone as I stared at that message. Every bone in my body screamed at me to open it, but I couldn't move. It felt like I just stepped into a pool of ice-cold water, my brain going numb from the shock. Jen came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, and saw me holding her phone. Her face twisted into a furious scowl. "What the hell are you doing, Mark?" she yelled, snatching it out of my hand. "Are you seriously going through my messages now?" I stammered, trying to come up with something to say, but the words got stuck in my throat. All I could do was watch as she slammed her phone down and stormed out of the bedroom, muttering curses under her breath. That night, she slept in the guest room, and I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The message burned into my mind. "Can't wait to see you again, babe." It wasn't long after that night when everything truly fell apart. But I guess, in a way, it was already crumbling. I just didn't want to see it. After that night, things between us got worse. Jen started staying out even later, coming home at odd hours and always smelling like some cheap cologne that made me sick to my stomach. She was colder, more distant, and every time I tried to talk to her, she'd either blow me off or blow up in my face. I kept telling myself it was work stress, or maybe she was just going through something, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. Then, one evening, I made the decision that changed everything. I took the day off work, telling Jen I'd be stuck at the office late, just like usual. She seemed relieved, actually relieved, when I said I'd be busy, as if she had been waiting for a chance to get rid of me. That was the first real slap in the face, but I didn't show it. Instead, I stayed home, quietly tucked away in my study, waiting. I waited for her to leave, and when she did, dressed way too nice for a casual night out with the girls, I followed her. I'm not proud of it, but desperation makes you do things you never thought you'd do. I kept a safe distance, driving behind her as she navigated through the city. She finally pulled up at this fancy, dimly lit restaurant downtown, the kind of place we used to go to on special occasions. I parked a block away and watched her get out of the car, adjusting her dress and checking her reflection in the window before she strutted inside. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I got out of the car and made my way to the restaurant, trying to stay out of sight. I caught a glimpse of her as she walked toward a corner table where a man was waiting for her. A man I didn't recognize, a tall, well-dressed guy with a smug grin plastered on his face. I crept closer, trying not to draw attention to myself. They were sitting close, laughing and touching each other's hands. That was when I heard it, his voice low and smooth. "So, when are you finally going to dump the poor bastard? He's clearly too stupid to realize what's going on." Jen laughed, a sound so fake it made my skin crawl. "Oh, believe me, he's clueless. I don't even have to try anymore. He's too busy feeling sorry for himself to notice what I'm up to." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. All the air left my lungs as I watched them flirt, oblivious to the fact that I was right there, a few feet away, listening to every vile word. I stood there, frozen, torn between running in and confronting her, or just walking away. But I couldn't leave. I needed to know more. So I waited. I waited until she excused herself to the restroom and he sat there, scrolling through his phone with that infuriating grin still on his face. My blood boiled. I could barely control myself as I walked up to him, gripping the edge of the table to keep from punching that smirk right off his face. "Who the hell do you think you are?" I growled, my voice low but trembling with rage. He looked up, confused for a split second before recognition dawned. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, a lazy smile spreading across his lips. "Well, look who we have here," he said calmly. "You must be Mark. I've heard so much about you." I wanted to scream, to yell, to make a scene, but all I could do was glare at him, my fists clenched tight at my sides. "You're the guy she's been seeing?" I managed to choke out. He shrugged casually. "She's not the only one, but yeah, it's been fun." "Fun?" I spat, my voice louder than I intended. A few heads turned our way, but I didn't care. "You call ruining my marriage fun?" "Whoa, easy there," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I'm not the one who's been miserable for the past year. If anything, I'm doing her a favor. I think you should thank me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this guy for real? Before I could say anything else, Jen reappeared, her face paling when she saw me standing there. For a moment, just a brief moment, I thought she might feel guilty or scared. But instead, she just crossed her arms, looking more annoyed than anything else. "Mark, what are you doing here?" she hissed. "What am I doing here?" I echoed, incredulous. "What the hell are you doing, Jen? Do you have any idea how this feels? To hear you talk about me like that, like I'm some pathetic loser?" "Oh, grow up, Mark," she snapped, rolling her eyes. "You shouldn't have been eavesdropping if you didn't want to get your feelings hurt. And you know what? I'm glad you know now. Maybe you'll finally stop being such a doormat." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I stood there, staring at her, feeling more broken than I ever had in my entire life. But I knew I couldn't let her see me crumble. Not there. Not in front of that smug asshole and the few onlookers who were now watching us. "You think you're going to get away with this?" I asked, my voice shaking. Get away with what? She shot back. You mean finding a man who actually knows how to treat a woman? I felt something snap inside me, a white-hot anger bubbling up that I couldn't contain. But instead of lashing out, I just turned and walked away. Because I knew, oh, I knew, that if I stayed another second, I'd do something I'd regret. So I left them there, standing together, their laughter ringing in my ears as I stumbled out of the restaurant. I made it back to my car, collapsing into the driver's seat, my hands trembling so violently I could barely get the keys in the ignition. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. I pounded the steering wheel, screaming until my voice was raw. What had I done to deserve this? What had I ever done to her to make her hate me so much? But the worst part? Even then, after everything I'd heard, some part of me still wanted to fix things, to go back in there and beg her to come home with me, to promise I'd be better, that I'd be the husband she deserved. I hated myself for it, for being so damn weak. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the dashboard, my mind racing in circles. And then I decided. I needed to hit her where it hurt. I wasn't going to take this lying down. If she wanted to play games, fine, but I wasn't going to let her win. With a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and started typing. I knew she'd get the message while she was still with him. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the pain she'd inflicted on me. And when I hit send, I imagined the look on her face as she read my words. I hope you're having a good time with your lover. Because guess what? It's over. I'm done being your punching bag. Don't bother coming home tonight. I'm changing the locks. And then I shut off my phone, threw it in the back seat, and drove away. Away from the restaurant, away from her, away from everything I thought I knew. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind spinning with a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and betrayal. I couldn't believe how twisted everything had become, how the woman I'd loved and trusted could turn into a complete stranger. No, not a stranger, a monster. I finally ended up at a rundown bar on the edge of town, the kind of place where nobody asks questions and nobody cares who you are. I needed a drink, or maybe 10. I wanted something to dull the pain, to shut off the chaos in my head. I ordered a whiskey, downing it in one go before ordering another, and another. My hands still trembled as I fished my phone out of my pocket, staring at the empty screen. Part of me hoped for a message from her, a desperate apology, an attempt to salvage what little dignity she had left. But there was nothing, just the cold, empty silence that seemed to mock me. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I opened her contact and dialed. The phone rang once, twice, and then she picked up. Her voice was icy, dripping with irritation. What do you want, Mark? I want to know why, I said quietly, struggling to keep my voice steady. Why would you do this to me, Jen? Why lie and cheat and treat me like garbage? What did I ever do to you? There was a pause, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I heard a hint of guilt in her voice. But then she laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that sent shivers down my spine. You want to know why? Because you're weak, Mark. Pathetic. You never stood up to me, never made me feel like I was worth anything. You just let me walk all over you. That's not true, I protested, my voice rising. I loved you. I tried to make you happy, to be there for you. Love? She spat the word like it was poison. You think love is enough? I needed excitement, passion, not some boring guy who spends his nights whining about how hard work is. I wanted more, and I found it elsewhere. Get over it. My heart sank as I listened to her. This wasn't the woman I married, the woman I'd shared my life with. This was someone else, someone cruel and vindictive, and I couldn't figure out where it all went wrong. So that's it, then? You're just going to throw it all away like it meant nothing? It meant nothing, she said flatly. We meant nothing. And now that you know, why don't you just move on? I'm sure you'll find some other sad, lonely woman to make miserable. The words cut deeper than any knife could. I could barely breathe, the pain suffocating me. You know what, Jen? I actually feel sorry for you, I managed to say through gritted teeth. I feel sorry because one day, you're going to wake up and realize that you destroyed something real for a fling. And by then, it'll be too late. Blah, blah, blah. You're such a drama queen, Mark, she sneered. If you want to wallow in self-pity, go ahead. But I'm done with this conversation. Goodbye, Mark. The line went dead, and I stared at the phone in disbelief. That was it? Just goodbye, like I was some random person in her life? I tossed the phone on the bar counter, feeling more hollow than ever. The bartender gave me a sympathetic look as he refilled my glass. I sat there for a while, nursing my drink, trying to make sense of it all. The pain was still there, raw and searing. But somewhere underneath it was a flicker of something else, resolve. I couldn't just let her walk away unscathed. Not after everything she put me through. If she wanted to play dirty, fine. I'd give her a taste of her own medicine. I started by calling my buddy Ethan. He was a lawyer, one of those cutthroat types who didn't take crap from anyone. I knew I needed someone like him on my side, someone who wouldn't back down. Hey, Mark, what's up? Ethan's voice was cheerful, oblivious to the turmoil I was in. I need your help, I said quietly. It's Jen. She's been cheating on me. There was a pause, then a low whistle. Damn, man. I'm sorry to hear that. What do you need me to do? Everything, I said firmly. I want to make her regret every lie, every insult, every time she looked down on me. I want to hit her where it hurts. Ethan's voice grew serious. All right, let's talk strategy. But I'm warning you, Mark. Once we start, there's no going back. I don't care, I said, my resolve hardening. I want her to suffer. Over the next few days, we put everything into motion. I took screenshots of our bank accounts, our assets, our shared investments, every little detail that could be used against her. And then I made sure to gather evidence of her infidelity. Photos, messages, anything that painted her as the lying, cheating bitch she was. Ethan assured me that we had more than enough to nail her to the wall. I spent those nights in a cheap motel, avoiding home as much as I could. Every time I saw Jen's name pop up on my phone, I felt that familiar surge of anger. She hadn't even bothered coming home after our confrontation. Instead, she sent a string of messages demanding to know what I was planning, spewing insults and threats. But I didn't respond. I wanted her to stew in uncertainty, to wonder what I was up to. And when the time was right, I made my move. One evening, I showed up at the house. I'd already filed the divorce papers, had them sent to her through a courier service. The locks were changed, and her things were packed neatly in boxes on the front porch. When she pulled up in her car, looking smug and confident as ever, I stepped out of the shadows, holding up a document. What the hell is this? She snapped, snatching it out of my hand. Divorce papers, I said calmly, watching as her expression shifted from annoyance to shock. You've got 30 days to respond. I suggest you read them carefully. You can't be serious, she hissed, her face contorting with rage. You think you can just throw me out? After everything I've done for you? Everything you've done to me, you mean, I corrected her. You wanted me gone, remember? Well, here's your wish granted. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off, stepping closer. Oh, and just so you know, I'm not leaving you with a penny. You'll be out on your ass with nothing. I've made sure of that. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face for the first time. You can't do this. Oh, you'll what? I interrupted, my voice cold and unyielding. Take me to court? Try to ruin me? Go ahead, Jen. You'll only be wasting your time. I have all the evidence I need to prove your infidelity, and trust me, it's not going to end well for you. She stood there, trembling with rage, but I could see the fear creeping in. She knew I was serious, knew that I wasn't the pushover she'd thought I was. And that's when I realized I'd won. Maybe not in the way I wanted, but I'd taken back some control, some dignity. Get off my property, I said quietly, stepping back. You're not welcome here anymore. She stared at me, eyes blazing with hatred, before turning on her heel and stomping off. I watched as she sped away, the taillights of her car disappearing into the night. And then I stood there, alone in the driveway, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt free. Free from her lies, her manipulation, her cruelty. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. There'd still be a legal battle, still be fallout to deal with, but I didn't care. Because now I knew I'd come out on top. That night, after I finally sent Jen packing, I returned to the empty house, my house, and stood there, looking around at the emptiness that used to be our home. All the pictures of us together were gone. The rooms felt cold and lifeless, and every corner seemed to echo with the ghosts of what we used to be. There was no laughter, no warmth, just silence and the bitter sting of betrayal. I walked through each room, feeling a strange mixture of relief and grief. I'd thrown out every trace of her, packed up all her belongings, and tossed anything that reminded me of the good times we once had. It was like erasing a part of my own life, but I knew I had to do it if I wanted to move on. The bedroom was the worst. I stood in the doorway, staring at the empty bed, remembering all the nights we'd spent talking, laughing, making plans for the future. The nights I'd held her, believing she was the only woman I'd ever need. How could it all have been a lie? How could she just toss me aside like I was some disposable piece of trash? I clenched my fists, trying to keep the anger from boiling over. But the pain was relentless, gnawing at me from the inside out. I collapsed onto the bed, burying my face in my hands as the tears finally came. I hated myself for crying, for letting her still have that power over me, but I couldn't help it. Everything hurt. My heart, my pride, my very soul. I remembered every insult, every time she called me weak or pathetic. Her voice echoed in my mind, mocking me, belittling me. And the worst part was, I almost believed her. For years, I'd been bending over backwards, trying to make her happy, trying to be the man she wanted me to be. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. She always found something wrong, something to criticize. I thought it was my fault, that I wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't man enough. But now, I realized the truth. It was her. She was the problem, not me. The tears turned to sobs, and the sobs turned to guttural, anguished cries that filled the empty room. I screamed into the darkness, letting out every ounce of pain and frustration. I screamed for the years I'd wasted, for the love I'd given that was never returned, for the man I'd lost trying to please a woman who never deserved me. But as the storm of emotions finally began to calm, a strange clarity settled over me. I wasn't crying because I wanted her back. I wasn't mourning the loss of her. I was mourning the loss of myself, the man I used to be before she broke me down and twisted me into something I didn't recognize. And now, in the silence of that empty house, I realized it was time to find that man again. Slowly, I stood up and walked over to the dresser, opening the top drawer. I pulled out a small, black velvet box, the one I'd been hiding for months. Inside was the engagement ring I'd planned to upgrade for our 10th anniversary. I'd spent months searching for the perfect one, something that would make her smile, that would remind her of why we fell in love in the first place. With a bitter laugh, I snapped the box shut and tossed it into the trash. What a fool I'd been. All that time, she'd probably been laughing behind my back, sharing intimate moments with that guy. What was his name again? Oh, right, Steve. Steve, the charming coworker who understood her, who made her feel special. Special. What a joke. Special like a piece of garbage you throw away when it's no longer useful. The next morning, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. Not the gut-wrenching pain I'd felt the night before, but a hollow, detached numbness. It was like my body had finally accepted what my mind had known for months. She was gone, and good riddance. But now, I was left with a new problem. What was I supposed to do with myself? I took a shower, dressed in the first thing I found, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the blank notepad in front of me. I wanted to write down everything I felt, to get it out of my head, but the words wouldn't come. All I could think about was what Ethan had said to me the day before. Once we start, there's no going back. I wasn't just divorcing her. I was about to obliterate her entire world, and I had to be ready for the fallout. Ethan was a shark when it came to legal battles, and I knew he'd do everything to make sure I walked away with everything. But this wasn't just about money or property. This was about making her feel what I felt. I wanted her to experience the same gut punch of despair and hopelessness she'd inflicted on me. I called Ethan later that day, setting up a meeting to go over the final strategy. He sounded confident, almost too confident, but I didn't care. As long as I got to see her squirm, it would be worth it. "Mark, you're doing the right thing," he assured me as we sat in his office, going through the documents. "We've got her cornered. There's no way she's coming out of this without losing everything." "I don't want just the house or the money," I muttered, staring at the papers in front of me. "I want her to feel it, Ethan. I want her to know exactly how much she hurt me." Ethan nodded, his expression serious. "She will, trust me. We're going to hit her where it hurts the most. But you need to be prepared, man. She's not going to take this lying down." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I know, but I don't care. I'm done being the nice guy. I'm done letting her walk all over me." We spent hours going over every detail, planning out each step of the divorce proceedings. By the time I left his office, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. This wasn't going to be easy, but I knew it was the only way to take back control of my life. Over the next few weeks, the battle lines were drawn. Jen tried every trick in the book, crying, begging, threatening to take me to court, claiming I was being unreasonable. But I didn't budge. I'd already made up my mind, and there was no turning back. She could whine and scream all she wanted, but the evidence was irrefutable. When we finally met in court, she looked like a shadow of her former self. The confidence, the arrogance, it was all gone. Instead, she looked small, vulnerable, and for a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered all the lies, all the times she'd made me feel like I was less than nothing. And I knew I was doing the right thing. I watched as she crumbled on the stand, as Ethan tore her to pieces with the evidence we'd gathered. Every sneaky little text, every meeting with her lover, every insult she'd hurled at me, it was all laid bare for everyone to see. She tried to defend herself, tried to paint me as some jealous, controlling husband, but it didn't work. The truth was out, and there was no hiding from it. When the judge finally ruled in my favor, granting me the house, the majority of our assets, and even a restraining order against her, I felt a wave of triumph. But there was no joy, no satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness. As I walked out of the courtroom, I glanced back at her one last time. She was slumped in her seat, staring blankly at the floor, a shell of the woman she used to be. "Goodbye, Jen," I whispered under my breath, and then I turned and walked away, leaving her and our shattered past behind. This was the end, but it was also a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, to find the man I used to be before she broke me. And maybe, just maybe, one day I'd learn to trust again. But for now, it was enough to know that I'd finally taken back control of my life. Even after the court ruling, even after watching Jen lose everything, the anger and resentment refused to die down. You'd think I'd feel some satisfaction, right? I'd walked out of that courtroom with everything. Our house, most of our savings, even a restraining order to keep her away. I'd won in every way possible. But deep down, there was still something burning inside me, something that craved more. I couldn't stand the idea of her walking away without truly suffering. She was still in town, still showing up at our mutual friends' places, crying her eyes out and playing the victim. It infuriated me to no end. Every time I heard through the grapevine that she was barely making it, or had nowhere to stay, I almost laughed. This woman, who had ruined me emotionally and tried to take everything I owned, was now whining about her own self-inflicted misery. It wasn't enough, so I started digging deeper. I wanted to know everything about her life post-divorce, who she was seeing, where she was working, and, most importantly, who still supported her. And it didn't take long to find out. People talk, especially when they know you're the wrong party. I found out that Jen had taken a job at a low-level retail store, earning minimum wage. The fall from grace was steep. She used to be a respected HR manager with a six-figure salary. But with her reputation in tatters and her lover nowhere to be found, she had no choice but to take whatever she could get. She lost her friends too. Most of them knew about the affair, And after the court proceedings exposed just how manipulative and deceitful she'd been, they dropped her like a bad habit. Now she was completely alone. But it wasn't enough for me. I wanted to crush whatever dignity she had left. So I came up with a plan. A plan that would leave her with nothing but the shame she deserved. The first step was making sure she stayed in her financial hell. I had already secured most of our assets, but I knew she'd try to go after whatever crumbs were left. I enlisted Ethan's help again, pushing for a second legal action that demanded she repay a portion of the funds she'd siphoned from our joint account to finance her lavish dates with Steve. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her tethered to a mountain of debt she couldn't hope to pay off with her meager income. When she got the notice, she lost it. She called me, screaming into the phone about how I was a vindictive bastard and that I'd ruined her life. I just listened, letting her rant until she ran out of steam. And then, with a calmness that surprised even me, I said, "No, Jen. You ruined your life. I'm just making sure you live with the consequences." She hung up, but not before letting out a guttural scream that reverberated through my ear like a sweet melody of revenge. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. But I wasn't done yet. I knew she'd never accept responsibility for what she did. So I decided to make her face the truth in the most public way possible. With the help of a friend who worked in tech, I set up a fake social media account and started posting pictures of the evidence I'd gathered, screenshots of her messages with Steve, quotes from the court documents. It all went up online. I didn't use her name directly, but anyone who knew us could put two and two together. It didn't take long for people to start talking. Our old acquaintances, co-workers, even distant relatives. Everyone started reaching out to her, asking if the rumors were true. Her social media presence evaporated overnight. She deleted her accounts, but by then, it was too late. The damage was done. She was humiliated, her reputation even more shattered than before. She tried to lay low, but I wasn't about to let her hide. I knew where she was living, an old, run-down apartment on the other side of town. So one day, I drove over there. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I needed to see her reaction one more time. Needed to see for myself that she was truly broken. I waited outside, watching as she dragged herself home from work, looking exhausted and defeated. When she saw me standing there, her face contorted with a mixture of shock and anger. "What the hell do you want?" she spat, dropping her grocery bag on the ground. A few cans rolled out, and she cursed under her breath. I smiled, leaning against my car. "Just wanted to see how you're holding up, Jen. Are you here to gloat? To rub it in my face that I have nothing left thanks to you?" she snapped, eyes blazing with fury. "Thanks to me?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "No, Jen. Thanks to you. You did this to yourself." She looked like she was going to explode. "You're a monster," she hissed. "You're nothing but a vindictive, heartless monster." I stepped closer, dropping my voice to a whisper. "Maybe I am, but at least I'm not a liar and a cheater." She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't feel the slightest bit of pity. She deserved every ounce of pain she was feeling. And then, just as she turned to walk away, I said the words I'd been holding back. "Oh, by the way, how's Steve doing? Still enjoying his time with you?" She froze, her back stiffening. Slowly, she turned around, her face pale and stricken. What do you mean?" I let out a low chuckle. "Oh, you don't know, do you? Well, let me fill you in. After our little chat at the restaurant, I did some digging. Found out a few interesting things about your precious Steve. Like the fact that he's married. Oh, and his wife? She knows everything now. Every single detail." Jen's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked like she was going to be sick. You told her?" "I did," I confirmed, relishing the way her face twisted in horror. "And she wasn't too happy about it. Last I heard, Steve's couch surfing, jobless, and going through a nasty divorce of his own. So, looks like you two lovebirds have a lot in common now." She stared at me, eyes wide with disbelief. And then, to my absolute shock, she started sobbing. Not the fake, manipulative tears I'd seen her shed before, but real, gut-wrenching sobs that made her whole body shake. I watched, stunned, as she sank to her knees, clutching her head like she was trying to hold herself together. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why are you doing this to me?" "Because you deserve it," I said simply. "And because you need to understand that actions have consequences. You can't just go around destroying people's lives and expect to walk away unscathed." She didn't respond, just sat there on the cold, dirty ground, weeping like a broken doll. I should have felt triumphant, should have felt that this was the closure I'd been craving. But as I stood there, watching the woman I once loved crumble before me, I realized something. I didn't want this anymore. I didn't want to be consumed by hatred and revenge. I didn't want her to have any power over me, not even the power to make me feel like this. I took a deep breath, letting the anger dissipate. Then I turned and walked away, leaving her behind. I didn't look back. It was over. Truly, completely over. Leaving her there in that rundown neighborhood, sobbing on the sidewalk like she had nothing left in the world, I felt an unfamiliar sense of relief. It was like a heavy weight that had been pressing on my chest finally lifted. My footsteps were lighter as I walked back to my car, my head clearer than it had been in months. The thirst for revenge that had driven me was gone, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I spent the next few weeks getting my life back on track, focusing on things I'd neglected during the chaos of our imploding marriage. I started working out again, went back to some of my old hobbies, fishing, hiking, even woodworking. I reconnected with friends I hadn't spoken to in ages, people who had been pushed aside while I was too wrapped up in my own misery. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again. Not the Mark who had been broken and betrayed, but the Mark who had dreams, goals, and a life outside of that toxic relationship. But Jen wasn't done trying to worm her way back into my life. It started with messages. At first, they were short and pleading. "Mark, can we talk? I'm sorry. Please, let's meet." But I ignored them. She had plenty of chances to talk when we were married, and she wasted every single one. Then the calls began. Late-night drunken rants where she alternated between begging for forgiveness and cursing me out, blaming me for everything wrong in her life. I blocked her number, but she found new ways to get through. Random emails, private messages from unknown accounts, even handwritten letters dropped off at the door. Each one was more desperate than the last, but I didn't respond. I'd made up my mind. There was no going back. I didn't want to hear her lies, didn't want to give her another chance to twist the narrative. But one letter stood out from the rest, and it wasn't because of what she wrote. It was the shaky handwriting, the tear stains smudging the ink, the tone that felt genuinely broken. "Mark, I don't expect you to forgive me. I know I destroyed everything we had, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But there's something I need you to know. I'm not well. I'm not in a good place. Please, just talk to me one last time. I don't have anyone else. I can't do this alone." A part of me almost felt pity, but the scars she left on me were too deep to allow real compassion. Still, I showed the letter to Ethan, wanting his take on it. "Do you think she's bluffing?" I asked, handing it over to him. Ethan read it carefully, his brow furrowing. "Maybe, maybe not. But even if she's serious, Mark, you need to think about what's best for you. She's good at manipulating emotions, remember? This could just be another ploy to get back into your head." I nodded slowly, taking the letter back. He was right. Jen had a way of twisting things to suit her needs, of making herself out to be the victim no matter how wrong she was. But something about this letter felt different. I couldn't explain it, but a tiny voice in the back of my mind urged me to at least check on her. Not to reconcile or forgive, but to make sure she wasn't going to do anything drastic. Against my better judgment, I drove over to the address listed on the envelope. It was a shabby little apartment complex on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the paint was peeling, and you could hear every argument and muffled sob through the paper-thin walls. I parked the car and sat there for a long moment, debating whether I should really go through with this. But then I saw her, a frail figure standing outside, smoking a cigarette with trembling hands. She looked up as I approached, and for a second, I almost didn't recognize her. Jen had lost weight, her face gaunt and hollow. Her once bright eyes were dull, surrounded by dark circles that made her look like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was a tangled mess. She looked defeated. "Mark," she croaked, the cigarette falling from her fingers as she stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. "Jen," I replied stiffly, stopping a few feet away. I didn't want to get too close. "You asked me to come, so here I am." She blinked, tears welling up in her eyes as she wrapped her arms around herself. I didn't think you would," she stammered. "I thought you'd just ignore me like before." I didn't respond. I waited, giving her the chance to speak. She shifted awkwardly, looking anywhere but at me. I'm sorry, Mark, for everything. I know you don't want to hear it, but I needed to say it. I've lost everything. My job, my friends, even Steve. He left me right after you told his wife." I felt a flicker of satisfaction at the mention of Steve's name. "Good," I said flatly. "You deserve each other." Jen flinched, nodding slowly. "Yeah, I guess we do." She took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I need help, Mark. I'm not okay." She looked up at me then, and I saw it, the raw, naked fear in her eyes. Fear of being alone, fear of what she'd become. And for the first time in a long time, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, buried beneath all the bitterness and betrayal. She was broken, just like I'd been, but that didn't change anything. "What do you expect me to do, Jen?" I asked softly. "You destroyed our marriage. You betrayed me in every possible way. I don't owe you anything." "I know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I know you don't, but I have nobody else. Please, Mark. I don't want money or anything like that. I don't want to feel like this anymore." I stared at her, my heart a conflicted mess of emotions. I didn't want to hate her anymore. I didn't want to carry this burden of anger and resentment. But I couldn't just let her back into my life. I had my own healing to do, my own path to walk. "I can't help you, Jen," I said quietly. "Not like this. You need to find help, real help. A therapist, a counselor, someone who can actually get you through this." She nodded, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry, Mark, for everything. I wish I could take it all back, but I know I can't. I know I ruined everything." I took a step back, taking a deep breath as I tried to steady myself. "I hope you find peace, Jen, but I can't be the one to give it to you." And with that, I turned and walked away, her cries echoing in the distance. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was back in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I drove away from that place, leaving behind not just Jen, but the last remnants of the pain and heartbreak she'd caused me. It was time to let go. Time to focus on myself, on building a life that didn't revolve around what she'd done to me. I spent the following weeks immersing myself in my work, planning trips I'd always wanted to take but never had the chance to. I reconnected with family, apologized for pushing them away during the dark days of my marriage. Slowly, I started to find joy again, little by little, but every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about her, wondering if she ever got the help she needed, if she ever found a way to move past the mess she'd made of her life. I didn't want to care, but some part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, couldn't help it. One day, I got a message from Ethan. He'd heard through the grapevine that Jen had checked into rehab. Apparently, she'd been struggling with alcohol and prescription pills. It was a wake-up call, he said, a chance for her to finally take control of her life. I stared at the message for a long time, then put the phone away. It was good that she was getting help. Maybe she'd finally understand what she'd lost, and maybe, just maybe, she'd become a better person for it. But it didn't matter anymore, because I had my own life to live, my own future to build. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that someday, I'd meet someone who truly deserved my love and loyalty. Someone who wouldn't throw it all away for a moment of excitement. Until then, I'd keep moving forward, one step at a time. Months passed, and life slowly began to settle into something resembling normalcy. It wasn't easy, but I started to see glimpses of the person I used to be before everything fell apart. I threw myself into work, spent more time outdoors, and even started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Something about spending time with those animals, creatures who'd been abandoned and hurt yet still managed to show love, helped me heal in ways I didn't think possible. I stopped checking for updates on Jen's situation. At some point, I deleted the last few messages she'd sent me, the ones filled with apologies and promises of change. It didn't matter whether they were genuine or not. I wasn't interested in reopening that chapter of my life. I'd closed the book, burned it, and buried the ashes. There was no going back. One evening, while I was out walking through the park, I ran into an old friend, someone I hadn't seen since before everything with Jen blew up. Her name was Allison. We'd been close in college, but after graduation, we drifted apart, each going our separate ways. Seeing her again was like a breath of fresh air. "Mark, is that really you?" she called out, a surprised smile lighting up her face. "Allison, hey?" I waved, feeling a genuine smile spread across my own face. It felt good to smile like that again, without the weight of bitterness pulling it down. We ended up catching up for hours, talking about old times and what we'd been up to. She'd gone through her own rough patch. Her fiancé had left her for another woman just months before their wedding. It was a strange, bittersweet comfort to know that someone else understood exactly what it felt like to be betrayed by the person they trusted most. We exchanged numbers and started hanging out more often, going for coffee, hiking, and even just sitting by the lake, talking about everything and nothing. There was no pressure, no expectations. Just two people rediscovering a friendship that had been put on hold for too long. One day, as we sat by the lake watching the sun set, Allison turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Mark, can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, glancing at her curiously. "Do you ever, I don't know, think about giving someone new a chance? I mean, after everything that happened?" I hesitated, staring out at the water as I thought about her question. "I used to think I'd never be able to trust anyone again," I admitted quietly. "But now, I don't know. I guess I'm starting to believe it's possible. I'm not ready yet, but maybe someday." She nodded, her gaze soft and understanding. "You'll know when you're ready. Just don't close yourself off completely, okay? Not everyone's going to hurt you like Jen did." I smiled at her, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "I know, Allison, and I appreciate you reminding me of that." We left it at that, but something shifted between us after that conversation. We started spending even more time together, our conversations becoming deeper and more personal. And somewhere along the way, I realized that the wounds Jen had left weren't bleeding anymore. They were still there, scarred over, but no longer raw and painful. I could talk about what happened without feeling that familiar surge of anger or bitterness. I could talk about Jen without feeling like she had control over my emotions. And that's when I knew I was finally free. One evening, as we sat on the porch of my house, sipping on glasses of iced tea, I turned to Allison, my heart racing with a mixture of nerves and excitement. "Hey, Allison, can I ask you something this time?" "Of course," she said, looking at me with that same gentle smile that had become a source of comfort over the past few months. "Would you want to maybe go out with me sometime? I mean, not just as friends. Like, an actual date." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, I thought I'd overstepped, that maybe I'd misread everything. But then, a smile spread across her face, a smile so genuine and bright that it made my heart skip a beat. "I'd love that, Mark," she said softly. "I'd really love that." We took things slow. There was no rush, no pressure to dive headfirst into a relationship. We went on dates, enjoyed each other's company, and allowed our feelings to develop naturally. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love again. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't built on desperation or fear of being alone. It was built on mutual respect, trust, and a deep understanding of each other's pain. It was real. One night, as we lay on a blanket under the stars, Allison rested her head on my shoulder and murmured, "Do you ever wonder what Jin's up to now?" The mention of Jin's name no longer sent a jolt through me. I just shrugged, looking up at the sky. Not really. I hope she's okay, I guess. But I've moved on. I have my own life to live now. Allison nodded, snuggling closer. I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, Mark. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her closer. So do you, Allison. We fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people have found a sense of peace with themselves and each other. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that the past wouldn't define me, that I could build something new and beautiful out of the ashes of what Jin had destroyed. And as I looked down at Allison, watching her gaze at the stars with a content smile on her face, I knew I'd finally found what I'd been searching for. Not revenge, not validation, just happiness. Months turned into a year, and my life continued to evolve in ways I never imagined. Allison and I grew closer, and though we never rushed things, our bond deepened into something I cherished more than anything. I'd thought that what Jin did would haunt me forever, that the pain she caused would leave me unable to truly trust again. But I was wrong. Love was still possible. Happiness was still possible. And for that, I was grateful every single day. Then, one ordinary day, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Mark. The voice on the other end was faint, almost unrecognizable, but I knew who it was. Jen? I asked, my heart pounding. It had been over a year since we'd last spoken, and I'd thought I'd put her behind me for good. Yes, it's me, she replied softly. I didn't think you'd pick up. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. What do you want, Jen? There was a long pause, and then she sighed heavily. I wanted to apologize. Properly, this time. I'm not asking for forgiveness or anything like that. I know it's too late for that. But I needed to tell you that I'm sorry for everything. For what I did to you. For how I treated you. For all of it. I listened quietly, waiting for her to continue. I got help, you know, she murmured. I'm still getting help. Therapy. Rehab. Everything. I've been sober for 6 months now. That's good, I said, genuinely meaning it. I'm glad you're getting your life back on track, Jen. Thank you, she whispered. I needed to hear your voice one last time, to know that you're okay. I am, I said simply. I really am. There was a pause, and then she let out a shaky breath. I'm happy for you, Mark. I hope you find everything you deserve. Take care of yourself, Jen, I replied softly. Goodbye. Goodbye, Mark. The line went dead, and I sat there, staring at the phone for a long time. But there were no tears, no anger, no sadness. Just a quiet acceptance. I'd gotten the closure I didn't know I needed, and now I could truly move forward without any lingering doubts or regrets. I set the phone down, turning back to Allison, who was watching me with a questioning look. Everything okay? She asked gently. Yeah, I said, smiling at her. Everything's perfect. And as I pulled her into my arms, I knew, without a doubt, that I'd finally found my peace. My new beginning. My true happiness. The past was behind me, and I was ready to embrace the future.